after our jobs, that we did become a generation of hard workers.
What were some other possible explanations? I think that's one. Was it the sense of community that
Yes.
also
Oh,
took pride?
yes.
And very much so.
Yes, families had a need for each other.
Not only families, there was a neighborhood feeling that you don't see nowadays
And
at
the
all.
kids
I
who
agree
worked
with
in,
you, yes.
in Woolworths with us, there were 2 nights in the week where Woolworths was open till 10 o'clock. And by the time it was 8 o'clock or 7, we had already been there from 9 in the morning. We used to save the candy box wrappers and use them for shoes behind the counter because our feet were too swollen. We couldn't get our shoes on.
Well,
You know, it was that kind of thing. And we laughed about it, you know, and we cried when it hurt.
Listen, you think that's bad? My Aunt Rose used to have a millinery store.
Yeah.
I used to be down at the wholesale house at 8 o'clock in the morning, do the buying, come back with those big bags,
Yeah.
and then work till
That
10
was an
o'clock
aunt.
at night.
Can you imagine?
Could you tell me something about Aunt Rose? You
Oh,
know,
She
sure.
was fun, she was alive, she was driving.
I'll tell you,
Yeah.
she was sort of the focal gathering point of the family because she never forgot us. On Saturdays and Sundays, she came over with her car. She was the only one who had a car. And she took us to the park.
what years were
Now,
these?
wasn't that lovely?
It
She
was.
took these hungry kids to the park.
What year was
Oh,
this?
look.
Talking about 35,
She would have
36?
done more if she
See,
could.
Harold is
She was-
8
Oh,
years
she
old.
She
had
was
a
than me.
struggling, of course. She had
Oh,
a
yeah.
hat store.
Oh, yes.
You know, that wasn't the big money maker.
This is
in those
before
days
World
at
War
all.
II.
Yeah.
Oh, sure, way
Oh, yes.
before.
That
Okay,
was-
we're talking about in the 30s.
Oh,
now.
long before. This
Oh,
was
yeah.
World War.
Didn't she once
The
make a
20s.
hat for the Bud Billiken parade?
Oh yeah, that's one story I'll never forget. The Bud Billiken parade my aunt had a millinery store on 47th Street, and they had a big parade every year, and my aunt used to make the hats. Now my aunt was the world's worst hat maker,
That she
so so she sold the hat to the queen of the Bud Billiken parade. And halfway through the parade, the hat all fell apart. All the threads came out. And the woman ran into the store and she wanted to kill her. because the hat fell off. My aunt said to her, "Why are you angry? How would you know it was handmade if you didn't see the threads? If the threads didn't show and it didn't come out, how would you know it was handmade?" And she convinced them.
Would you say that the people were, I don't know, when we say a person's a character, I don't know exactly what that means, but you say that more people were characters?
I think so.
Yeah, I think we had
Yeah.
more
There was
individuality.
another remarkable trait in these people, like my aunt. They all had relatives, very close relatives, still in Europe, in Russia and in Poland. They were still there. And nobody could get them over. They didn't have the money. So this aunt of mine decided that she was going to go around no matter what the weather or anything. Now this is the mean aunt already. And wherever she went, to whatever relative, she got a quarter or a nickel or even in one of those little tin teapots, you know. And that's what she
This is
did.
what I would call a sense of community. That I have never seen it since those days.
Well,
Why not?
Harold,
Why
do you
not?
remember how every house had that little tin can where the 10% of
Yeah, I
everything
remember
you
that
had in
very
the
well.
house had
Where did that go
into it?
to? To the synagogue?
No.
No, no, it went
It
for
went-
the poor.
Yeah, for the
People
cemeteries,
poorer than
actually.
you
This
were.
was another charity, a very
You
powerful
know?
group.
Was there more compassion? There was more compassion?
Much more.
Much more.
Okay, so how do we lose it? We've lost individuality, we've lost the right to work, we've
No, we
lost
have
compassion
not.
for other people?
I don't agree with you.
Okay.
Well,
No, I do, I agree. We have
I-
lost a lot of it.
yeah.
It seems to me that when times are good, everybody is prosperous, they lose track of how the other people are living, how they're doing their
They know
entertainment.
damn well
No,
how
but there was
they're
something
living.
else.
When
Gus, go
things
ahead.
are, I don't care
The
whether
other
it's,
side of this.
There was a reason for it.
Well, no.
You could never forget where you came from in those days. You always remembered the people who were suffering that you left behind in Russia or Poland, that you had to help if you possibly could. And that's why people gave their pennies when they could hardly
Yeah.
afford to.
Yeah.
Well,
Or
Gus,
their
you just-
nickels and dimes.
I mean, were you saying that people are good still? I mean,
Oh, yes, there's always some good in people. We're not all animals.
well, I know. I was saying that there was a disagreement.
No,
I mean, a lot
as
of
to-
people stop beating their mothers, for instance.
handing a
No,
newspaper.
World War II.
Long line of people.
Well, maybe we could even have an historical continuum here, okay? Where the, we ready to go?
Yeah.
The Depression, okay, so we got through like 1933, 34. Okay, at that point you were thinking of going to college and you were starting your job and you're being younger, were working now? Let's pick a
Yeah.
year, let's pick 1936.
Yeah, I was working.
Yeah.
You were working, Dan?
Yes.
Dusty, you were?
Things were a bit better then.
Oh, yeah.
Why don't
they
we
were
back
in
up
the
a
dime
bit?
store,
Yeah.
remember?
Okay, that's right.
Swollen
Okay, and were you going to school, when did you go to Texas?
1927.
Oh, 1927.
Now, I came back in 1930 to take this summer job in
Uh-huh.
Chicago. And that's when I discovered how bad the Depression was.
Uh-huh.
Did you live with us at that time, Harold? Everybody lived
I
with
think I
us.
did.
Everybody.
No, I was staying with my brother, that's right, at that time. Later on, I lived with you.
Was he married or?
No, he was going with the girl.
Okay, so then, did things get, 1936, did they end, was the end of the Depression worse, and that's when the good times started to
In 30,
be not so much
is
fun?
when the Depression really was bad, because that's when I came back for that summer vacation and worked in Chicago and saw a long line of people. As I walked down the L steps in Chicago, waiting, and I didn't know what for. I couldn't figure out, they were in line. And as each person with a newspaper passed, he'd hand it to somebody in line. Newspapers were 2 cents then. The Tribune, of course, had...
Remember in those days, you didn't have your bank insurance. If a bank folded, you're lucky to get 25.
We had nothing. There was no relief even until Roosevelt came in.
There were, if you were lucky, you'd get 25 cents on a dollar for anybody that had any money in a bank.
Okay, and then Roosevelt came along, and, well, Roosevelt wasn't
Well,
along
then there was a moratorium on bank failures, and people began to get a little more confident.
And were you more confident?
Well, I remember when the war started, then I went to work in a defense plant.
Uh-huh.
I left the millinery stores. Thank God I left the millinery stores. And I went to work as a welder. I was a welder for a very short period of time.
You went to work for a welder, and World War II came, you were right
No, the first job I ever had was for $12 a week, working about 10 hours a day, 5.5 days a week. We were lucky, at that time, we were starting to get a half a day off on Saturday.
Let's go into the war.
Now,
Okay, good.
Now, when the war broke out, I was up to about $21 a week, which was a fortune.
And then you got drafted. Or you were in the reserve?
I was in the reserve at the time. I met a fellow, he and I joined the reserve, and I met quite a few other. Then at that time I thought I'd get my, they were drafting everybody for a year.
This is 42?
No.
Yeah. When was the war?
December 7th, 1941 was the war.
1941. Was in 39 or 40.
That's right.
Oh, I see. Oh.
See, so I thought I'd be smart going into the service, get my year over with, and say I'm free, I can take a job. But unfortunately, or fortunately, as the case may be, I still don't know, the war did break out, and I was in for the duration.
Uh-huh. Okay, so...
Now, when I came back to the States, for some reason or other, I still remember handing a person behind the counter a dime for a handkerchief. I didn't realize what inflation was. A handkerchief was a quarter then.
There's a big time of inflation then, during the war.
I was back to pre-war prices.
Gussie, where were you December 7th, 1941?
In Pearl Harbor.
Day.
I was working,
What did you think?
and the principal sent a message through all the classrooms. In the classrooms. It was in the Woolworths, and they sent through, what do you call it, through the...
Memo or
No, so
intercom?
out loud, so the customers
Uh-huh.
should hear too.
That war was declared.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Do you know what lessons I learned in that war from personal observations? That when a war breaks out, like World War II, and 10 million men go overseas. And everybody has a job anytime he wants it, and can quit a job and get a new job the next day, and I did, many
That's what was
times.
happening.
Uh,
Come in here.
But what struck me, because I was always keen on economics, even though I was a classics major, I spent more time on economics finally than I did on classics.
Were you still in college during the war?
I didn't go to college. I couldn't afford it.
No,
You did.
I was in college till, I graduated from the University of Chicago in 1932 and
That was the
took
first university.
and I won a fellowship and had a graduate year till 33.
You studied law at U of C?
No.
I was only there for 2 years.
Oh, yeah,
Because
and then
I
you
went
went-
to Texas U
Uh-huh.
for 3 years. But what I learned from firsthand observation about economics during the war was that there was greater prosperity than I had ever seen and probably have ever seen since, because it was completely spread among the population. Everybody was working, so who wanted to work.
Where?
And I'll never forget that, because no matter how prosperous we think we are today, there are millions of people out of work.
Yeah.
And there is never an experience like seeing everybody working who
So
wants to work.
did that change the way communities live and people live their lives, apart from the
For a
horror
while.
and tragedy of the war?
For a
I mean,
while it did.
Let's maybe even go right to after the war, okay?
Well, the war was a tremendous experience in itself, because in the first place, the mood of the people here, since most people didn't have anybody dying for a few years, for a year or so anyway, during the war, it was a mood really of fun, because if you went to Grand Park, you see thousands of sailors and Marines spread out in Grand Park with girlfriends, and everybody having a wonderful time, laughing and joking. And I went to San Francisco to take a job, and there the spirit was the same. If you didn't have a place to sleep, the hotel lobbies were available. You could sleep right in the lobby.
You know, I'll
That's
tell
the
you
spirit in
something.
wartime.
But I'll tell you something that was even more strange, was the fact that I for a year, I lived in Melrose Park, near where the Maywood Battalion were all wiped out on Corregidor. And it's funny, we didn't take it as a tragedy. I mean, here were kids who I went to school with, who had all been killed,
Uh-huh.
are captured. And this is war. We were heroes and heroines.
Well, Dad, did you have a different perspective on the war?
Remember when war broke in, I was still in the United States. When war broke out, I was in the United States in a small southern town that hated the GIs like poison. Something like Highland Park hates Fort Sheridan, but not bad enough to have the government close Fort Sheridan because they depend upon their revenue from there.
When did you go overseas?
I went overseas in January of 1942.
When did you come back?
1945.
Okay, so the war wasn't so much fun for you as it was for
I don't think so.
everybody else, right?
Where were you?
South Pacific. In fact, I was in a convoy. All of a sudden, we had orders to clear the deck. I happened to have been on the flagship, but didn't know it at the time. A plane comes over, drops a note, or some envelopes, whatever it was. After it was opened up about an hour later, we changed courses and went to Australia. We still believe our original destination was Corregidor.
But you saw a lot of combat where you were.
Well, I was in Bougainville, I was in Guadalcanal, and a couple more.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was enough.
I remember being in a town in Washington.
DC or?
No, Washington, the state of Washington, and I was working near there on some kind of war work, and there was a Jewish-owned store in that small town.
Want a banana for that?
Pay no attention to that woman.
All right, and I went to that store, And I talked to the lady who owned it, her name was Cohen. And I noticed that she didn't seem to have a husband with her in the store. She said she was a widow. And I was wondering why she was sort of startled when she looked at me, and I said, "What's the matter?" She said, "You look like my son." And I said, "Where is he now?" She said, "He was captured on Corregidor. And he was in the Bataan March, and I don't know if he's alive."
So you went through that experience of the war, okay, Depression, immigration, ghettoization, Depression, World War II, and somehow it came out of that with great hope
Yeah.
after World War II?
Never.
Well, if you...
What hope was?
Well, it depends. It depends on what you knew about
They
the
wanted
world.
more war.
I never had any
After
illusions
that.
about America after
don't
the
know.
war. Everybody said it's going to be wonderful, never have war
Sure, it was
again.
wonderful. We had
We're going to
big
have a better
expensive-
government. Well, I knew better by that time.
Why?
There was,
Your president didn't know better.
because
What
just
did
as
he
you
know?
must let Reagan be Reagan, you must let America be America. And
Which
Oh
is-
my God.
Which is?
I remember the period of intense patriotism that I know I went through and a lot of others of us did.
No patriotism.
50, 50,
No,
51?
yeah, really, after the war, during the war, after the war, and,
Everybody was interested in making a buck. They didn't
No.
give a damn about the
well, that
No,
was
they
true,
patriotism.
and it was not true of some people. I met all kinds of people during doing war work, people from all over the country. And I remember especially one fella who was Irish and had a temperament, a real typical temperament of an Irishman, very good friend, he proved to be. And I said to him, "What do you do to quit your job?" I said, I feel like quitting. He said, "Well,